Stereophonic Zoom lantegiak Mike Williams soinu ingeniari ingelesaren lana eta bere egiteko moduak gertutik ezagutzeko aukera eman du artelekun. Lantegi honek soinuaren irudi estereofonikoarenganako hurbilketa eta azterketa ariketa proposatu ditu. Teoria, praktika eta entzunaldi kritikoak batu dituzten zenbait lan saioren bidez, tailerraren helburua Mike Williamsek errealismo handiko soinuzko irudiak sortzeko propio sortutako mikrofonoak non eta nola jarri eta erabiltzeko sortutako teknikak ezagutzea da. Arekin izan gara gu bere lanaz, bizitzaz eta gaurko soinu ohituren gainean berbetan. Ark baduelako soinuaren kalitatearen, grabazio tekniken eta gaurko ohituren gainean berba egiteko nahikoa esperientzia. Egun bereziki musika klasikoko grabaketak egiten ditu, baina denetik egindakoa da bere ia 80 urtetan. Mike Williamsek BBC telebistakatean hasi zuen bere ibilbide profesionala. 4 urte besterik ez zituen baina eman bertan, Frantziara egin zuen handik.
After that I left the BBC to go and live in France, and there I started doing research into loudspeaker manufacture. I'm working for a loudspeaker company. I worked very in close collaboration with research workers in the ORTF at that time, building loudspeaker cabinets of very high quality. And then came an event in France that was to form the life of many people, and it was called May 1968. And I don't know whether you had this problem in Spain, but Paris went mad. And I was right in the middle of it. So I was on the factory gates, on strike, and they kicked me out of the company very shortly afterwards, and I had to look for a job. So I ended up working for the Education Authority in television, doing looking after the equipment and doing the programs. And eventually I was made the head of the studios, and I was working therefore for the Educational Authority, Adult Educational Authority in Paris, in France, and I found I was working for about 90% of my time doing administration and trying to fill in the holes of French administration, and doing 10% of what I really wanted to do. So I decided the best thing was to leave and to start being a freelance teacher and sound engineer. So one day I said bye-bye, and I left. And everybody said I was mad, and they were probably right. I lost, obviously, no pension and all the rest of it. And I started being a freelance teacher and sound recording engineer and started enjoying life. Sound recording has not changed really since I started doing it, which was in 1960, when I first went into the BBC. The basic approach to sound recording is the same and has never changed. Still the same principles. What has changed is the environment, technical environment we were working in. We used to work in analog recording, those days with things going round and round and round and pieces of brown stuff going from one side to the other, called tape recording. We still had microphone and loudspeakers, and now we've gone into the digital world where everything is done on the computer and very much more easy to exploit, to do editing and mixing. But the basic principles of sound recording are still the same. You still have to deal with direct sound and reverberation and perspective, and this is what's important in sound recording. So in fact, especially if you're teaching these subjects, you learn what you need to do to teach them, teach the technology, but the actual process of doing sound recording, doing mixing, the relationship of sound to image, if you're working for television or films, these things are still about the same. We've got lazy in that nowadays we use wireless microphones to put on the individual actors, for instance, in a drama, because the wireless microphones have got to a very, very high quality and as regards technology. So we use a boom, a fishing pole as they call it in English, I think, or a boom. We use this not very often, because most of the sound comes from these wireless mics that we have attached to us. So the idea of sound perspective has disappeared completely. Sound is what you get from this thing that's here under your mouth, and you don't have any movement of your microphone to give you an idea of what the perspective of the sound is in relation to the image you're seeing. So sound has lost a lot of its identity, and of course I've been living in France now for 45 years. In Spain you have the same problem. A great percentage of the amount of information that we actually watch on the television or on the cinema has been dubbed, produced and dubbed. So there's no longer any identity between what's happening with my lips and my face and the actual sound I'm listening to. And this, for a sound engineer, is extremely disturbing. These are two events that are taking place. There's this thing on the screen which is moving its lips and talking, and then there's this sound coming out. In fact, it's not moving, the sound is not moving with the lips at all. And when you're bilingual, as I am in French and English, I can actually translate what's being said by the lips in English when something completely different is coming out of the speakers in French. This is already happening. It's happening in a small scale, but it's happening. We've gone full cycle in sound recording. When I first went into the BBC, it was the end of the single microphone to record music or groups of people. In the old days, for instance, in the BBC, they used to put up one microphone, and you used to put the orchestra around that microphone. Spanish flies again. You put that one microphone up, and the group would be going around the microphone, and you would adjust the position of the people and the feeling of perspective in relation to that microphone. Then it was just the beginning of the period where the Beatles came in. We started doing 4-track recording, and we started doing re-recording. In other words, we record a track and then add on another track. And this gradually built up to the stage where we would have extremely sophisticated mixing desks, multi-track recorders of 32, 64 tracks, this kind of thing. And it was the sound engineer in the end who created the sound from these elements. It was no longer the musicians really who created the sound. This was the major period of my professional life, was working with this type of environment around us. And a lot of my teaching career was also teaching people how to use these extremely sophisticated objects, tools of our trade. But with the arrival of digital work, the quality of the recording, in fact, started to increase enormously. So in fact, we have easy access now to very high quality recording systems and microphones, that kind of thing, for not really very much. It's a democratization of sound, really. And this has meant that we are able to record high quality sound, and we're beginning to hear the problems with this type of fast food sound. We're beginning to be sensitive to the fact that it hasn't got certain aspects of quality of sound that we would like it to have. So in fact, we're coming back to the idea that maybe the techniques that we were using in the old days of less microphones, or even to the extent of just having a single object recording in one specific place, not just one microphone, but an array of microphones, is in fact producing qualities in the sound that we think we're missing, and making the sound much more interesting to listen to. The problem is that if you start listening to the original soundtrack, you hear lots of problems like noise. You hear cables being dragged across a studio floor, for instance, as the camera drags this cable with it. You hear, you have a high wide frequency range loudspeakers, and you're listening to a film, the soundtrack of a film, which probably only goes up to about 7 or 8 kilos. So you've got a lot of noise in the rest of it, whereas we're now used to listening to sound which goes up to the limit of the auditory system. We're used to listening to good bass, and a lot of these old recordings have some pretty boomy sound because we didn't have the high quality of microphones that we have now. So these tools have improved considerably. And I think there are people who are learning, I suppose you would say, that the high quality sound that we can have now can produce an interesting sound, something which will bring more information to them than that we had in the past. But there is the opposite tendency. There's still people who will now say, let's go back to valve preamplifiers on microphones and valve power amplifiers because the sound is nicer. It's nice and round. It's got a beautiful filter that rolls off from 8 kilos onwards, so you don't hear all this nasty noise. And this is another. Well, it's a fashion-driven approach rather than the quality of sound that we can have. If you train your ears, to listen for the faults and the qualities, then gradually we can improve our approach so that we're producing a very high quality signal to listen to. But we have to also educate the public to be able to use these signals, put the loudspeakers in the right places and have the right experience for this to become the everyday experience. A lot of people put the one loudspeaker in stereo, put one loudspeaker in the kitchen and the other one in the toilet, and this is what it means to them. Then they can hear the sound in both places, but they don't start talking about localization and equilateral triangles and this kind of thing. So it's a lot to do with education, and this takes a long, long time. The work I'm doing in arrays now with multi-channel 5 channels or in higher level channels, higher order channels, it might take another 10 or 15 years before people begin to really understand what this is bringing to sound. I'm doing demonstrations, for instance, in multi-channel sound, which for my ears are absolutely amazing. And it's not just because I've recorded it. I was amazed at the kind of sound and the kind of sound field that was being developed around me. And a lot of people ask me, well, is it really worth going to Blu-ray reproduction? I said, once you've listened to it on some good recording, you don't want anything else. You've got to experience it, and then you realize that this is the way things have got to go. But if it's just a problem of where to put your loudspeakers in a living room and the expense, considerable expense of setting up the system, then obviously it's going to take some time before we get that way. I don't think the film industry is helping us, or the video industry, because the type of mixing and type of product that they're producing is fast food. It's not the quality I'm talking about, which is microphone array recording, which is a bit of a specialized field that we work in.